Good morning, Sabbath School. I want to welcome you to the Albany Seventh-day Adventist Church. Those of you who are here this morning, it's always good to see you here. And I hope you've had a good week. It's certainly been a beautiful week as far as weather is concerned. In fact, this whole spring has been just kind of one day after another of sunshine. And I don't know about you, but I like the sunshine, so I'm not complaining. This has been it's been an interesting week. Those of you who've been following the news, evidence of a lot of things happening around the world. I don't know how many of you are aware of what's happening down in Haiti, but we see what happens in a country where law and order, you might say, disappears and gangs take over. Last week, a missionary couple down there were murdered as a result of the gang activities that are going on in Haiti. And the other thing that I just learned last night was that I think somewhere around 200 members of our church have lost their homes because of fires and fights that have been going on in the various, quote, neighborhoods, however you want to describe that. But again, it gives us a little glimpse as to what happens in societies and in worlds where law and order, you might say, disappear. Yesterday, we had another police officer who was murdered in this country, up in Minneapolis. And then, of course, we had the event that took place in the Manhattan courtroom this last 2.5 months, and a verdict that was finally brought forth this week. It's been very interesting listening to the commentary that people are making about some of these things. And it's easy to sort of assume that doesn't impact us here. We all slept last night safely in our homes. Our neighborhoods are quiet. There was no gunfire outside. We got up this morning, we ate our breakfast, we drove to church. The streets were not too busy. People stopped at stoplights, stop signs, and here we are. And it's like, really? Is anything happening? And yet there's a lot of things happening. A lot of things happening. I was reminded, and this actually was something that was brought to my attention by some of the things that I was reading. And there's a statement that I think many of you have probably heard. It says, "Our country, this country, shall repudiate every principle of its Constitution as a Protestant and Republican government." And it's hard to believe that is happening in real time today. But if you're listening and if you're watching, there are many, many people on both the left and the right, the conservative and the liberal, who are really getting nervous because of what they see happening. And they know where this leads to. They know what the response is when those restraints are taken away or when certain liberties are violated. So I think it's interesting that our lesson this week, lesson 9, is titled what? The foundation of God's government. So before we begin, let's just bow our heads and let's have prayer. Gracious Father in heaven, we thank you that you have blessed us with a beautiful Sabbath. We thank you for the opportunity to open your word, and we thank you for your Holy Spirit that is present. Please guide and direct as we consider the things that you have revealed. We thank you for hearing and answering this prayer. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So, the foundation of God's government. Before I get into that, though, I want to just touch bases on a number of things, and I really hope that the last three lessons you really spend some time thinking about and reading. If you haven't read through these lessons, I want you to read them, because they are really pull us into the moment that we're in. But I want to make a couple observations to kind of lay the groundwork for where we're going to go today in our lesson study. First of all, you're all familiar with William Miller. You've heard of him. Let me ask you a question. Does anybody know what denomination William Miller was a member of? He was a Baptist. And he was a Baptist what? Farmer. A farmer. Now, how did he become William Miller, the preacher? What happened? He studied the Bible. That's exactly right. And why did he study the Bible? That's a trick question here. Why did he study the Bible? He wanted to learn about God. And he went to the Bible and he started. He followed a very simple protocol. He started where? At the beginning, and he allowed the Bible to interpret itself. Okay, so he started reading through the Bible, asking himself the question, so what is this telling me about the kind of person God is and how he operates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in the course of his reading through the Bible, what did he discover? No, I can't give you a point for that. He discovered the book of Daniel. And in the book of Daniel, he discovered what we call time prophecies. And he got kind of intrigued with these things, and he started asking himself the question, can we figure out what these are talking about? Well, the answer is, if you read the Bible, you discover that there's some answers to those questions. And so eventually, William Miller zeroed in on Daniel 8:14, and he said unto me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state. And this little diagram that you see here up on the screen was in your quarterly, I think, 2 lessons back. And this, of course, led to the anticipation that at the end of this time prophecy, and William Miller and others spent a lot of time trying to figure out when this was going to end, and they finally arrived at October 22, 1844, and they thought what was going to happen? They thought Jesus was going to come back. Wonderful thing to anticipate. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. And so then, those people who had fervently studied and who had anticipated something to happen, and it didn't happen, were faced with a fork in the road. And what was the fork in the road? You could either study more, or you could throw it all out. 2 choices. And most people did what? They threw it out. Okay, they threw it out. But there were those who went back and said, wait a minute. We believe the evidence is such that, in fact, our interpretation of the calculation of our understanding as to what this is all about is correct, we must have made a mistake in terms of its application. And you're familiar, of course, with the story of Hiram Edson, and Hiram Edson, I believe, is at least credited with as being one of the first to, you might say, connect the dots in a different way. And part of what brought him to that conclusion was what we find in Daniel 7 and Daniel 8. And we looked at this. I'm kind of reviewing some things here, leading up to where we're going to go today. Okay, and if you look at the bottom, I don't have my pointer here, you've got 4 key words that are part of the summary of Daniel 7 and Daniel 8. First key word is judgment. The second key word is no. The second key word is heaven. Third key word is cleansing. And the fourth key word is sanctuary. Those are 4 words. And, you know, the assumption had been made that, in fact, that all applied to this cleansing of the sanctuary, applied to the earth. And then somebody said, well, wait a minute. Maybe this is referring to actually things that are happening in heaven. Good assumption. Okay, that's intro leading up to our study today. Now, as a result of Hiram Edson's insights, the early Advent believers began to focus on what? Yes, on the sanctuary. Okay, because the sanctuary is something that we find in the Old Testament and the New Testament. Now, in focusing on the sanctuary, what was unique about that focus? That's not a good question. I haven't answered it well. There you go. Was anybody else looking at the sanctuary? No. Why? Why was nobody else looking at the sanctuary? And when I say anybody else, let me go back and rephrase this. The people that we're talking about here, the Hiram Edsons, the Whites, the et cetera, the early Advent believers, these were people who were members of what churches? Methodist, Baptist, Congregationalist, Episcopalian, etc. These are people who were members of the Protestant churches of that time. Were they looking at the sanctuary? No. Why? Exactly. It had disappeared. As far as they were concerned, it was part of an old dispensation that was of no value today in their time, and was not worth their time spending looking at. Now, let me ask you this question. If you were to describe what the tabernacle system that God gave Moses at Sinai, what was God giving us in that sanctuary system? The plan of salvation. A sandbox illustration of the plan of salvation. Okay, now let me ask you this question. What is the focus of the plan of redemption or the plan of salvation? And this is a bit of a trick question, because there's more than one answer. Okay? Yes, Richard. Oh, you're going in that direction. Let's come back. Why did God give, what is the what is God trying to communicate in the sanctuary system? Okay. It is the plan. It is God trying to illustrate for us how he's going to save us. That's a partial answer. There's a much, much bigger answer. And that is the sanctuary system also deals with how God is going to deal with sin on a universal issue basis. In other words, how is God going to solve this problem that Satan has introduced into the universe? We tend to think of the sin problem as basically just our problem. No, it's actually a problem that involves the entire universe, and God is going to solve that. Okay? So, yes, please, Donna.
There was the daily sacrifice, but the Day of Atonement once a year.
Is that what you want up there? Is that the slide you want?
Yeah, that's what I wanted.
Okay. Yes, there's the daily service of the sanctuary system, but then there's also the yearly, okay? And the daily applies to how God is dealing with the sin problem that each one of us deals with individually. But then when it comes to the yearly, how God is going to deal with it in terms of the big, big picture. Okay? Exactly. Cleansing. Okay. Now, a point for Donna. Now, thank you, Geraldine. So the early Advent believers are now looking at the sanctuary in a very different way than they've ever looked at it before. They're trying to understand, what do all these different parts mean? Altar of burnt offering out in the courtyard, the laver, the showbread, the candlesticks, the altar of incense, the curtain that separates the holy and the most holy, and then inside is the Ark of the Covenant. What is all this about? These were not things that they were familiar with. These weren't things that they had even paid any attention to. And so they worked their way from the courtyard in, and they recognize that the altar of burnt offering is focusing on Calvary, Jesus' death on the cross. They move their way in through, and they finally come to the most holy. Now,
When they come to the Ark of the Covenant, when they open, when you look inside.
Wait. You can't say that. You're taking away my thunder here.
I'm sorry.
Okay. So before you get there, though, let's look at this here. Let me ask you a question. Let's go back now to this title of the lesson. What does it mean, government? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Depends. Okay, there can be a good government and there can be a bad government. Let's say we're talking about a good government, assuming a good government. Is that, I can't answer, that's not the right way to answer the question. So what is the purpose of government? What's that? Guide us. Okay, yeah, I think I'll give you a point for that. Structure, organization, yes, okay. And hopefully protection and things like that, yes. Okay, so government actually, I probably should give her 2 points, shouldn't I? Just to stay on the safe side here. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so when it says, and so how does all of these things, structure, order, liberty. What is it that makes it possible for those things to exist? Laws and rules. That's exactly right. In other words, things that define how things are supposed to operate. Okay? So, then let me ask you a question. What does the word foundation mean? The basis? Okay. The support, okay. In other words, everything above it is dependent upon what's down below. Jesus is the stone. Yeah, exactly. Jesus is the cornerstone of that foundation. Yes, okay. Now, when it says, if you're in a system that's operational, that's really moving smoothly, how much? Let me see. I'm trying to figure out how to formulate this question. In order for things to work smoothly, you have to have rules. Have you ever been in a situation where you have been a part of a smooth operating system, and yet you really aren't spending a lot of time thinking about the rules that make it happen? It just sort of becomes second nature. I don't know who got that. Yeah, there. I'll give you a point, Bondo. Yes, Richard.
To answer your question.
Yeah.
Leadership,
yeah. So one is leading by example. In other words, the way they operate, everybody else operates around them the same way. Okay. So, I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that in what makes the universe operate smoothly is exactly the same things that makes something down here operate smoothly. In other words, there are going to be rules or laws in the universe just as much as there are down here in terms of something operating smoothly. Now, as the early Advent believers, again, these are Methodists, Baptists, Congregationalists, Calvinists, Episcopalian, et cetera, as they are studying now the sanctuary and they're moving through the sanctuary, they come to the Ark of the Covenant. What is the Ark of the Covenant a symbol of?
God's presence.
Okay, I'm going to give you a point, but I want something a little more specific than that. God's what?
Government.
God's government. Okay, I'll give you a point there too. I'm going to use the term God's throne. Okay? It's his throne. In other words, it's recognized that this is the center of the government. And in this case, we're talking about God. Now, what is on the top of the Ark of the Covenant? Okay, two cherubims. Okay, they're on the sides. What's on the top? What?
Mercy seat.
The mercy seat. Okay. Interesting. Again, this I think ties right in with this idea of throne. Seat. What happens on a seat? You sit. That's where you sit when you are ruling. Okay. What is surrounding the seat? Okay. It's hard to see this here, but there's a crown. The entire top of the mercy seat, or the top of this ark, is a crown. So again, king, ruler, center of government. This is where you sit. This is where you operate. This is where you give orders, so to speak, as to how your universe is going to operate. And what's inside this seat? First and foremost is what? The Ten Commandments. 10 Commandments. And where are they in relationship to the mercy seat or the seat? They're underneath, okay? Again, symbolically communicating the fact that this is what everything is based on. Now, as I have studied this lesson, one of the things, I tend to read a variety of things, and there's a lot of confusion if you read what different people have written about, first of all, this law of God and this law of Moses. And, oh my goodness, there's all kinds of things kind of weaving back and forth here. But there are two laws, and what are those laws? One of them is the law of God, which was written by who? On tables of, and it was put where? Inside, underneath that seat, okay? It's a moral law. It was exalted by Christ. It was not abolished. It is spiritual. And it was present before when? Before sin, okay? Now, what does it mean when it says it's a law of liberty? It creates what? Freedom and order, as opposed to chaos, okay? It's not burdensome, and it is perfect. Versus the law of Moses, which was written by Moses. It is a book versus on stone. It was put where? Beside, pocket outside. It was a ceremonial law. What does that mean? It points forward. It's a teaching tool. It's helping people understand something that hasn't yet happened, but which will. Okay? It was fulfilled by Christ. In other words, it was pointing forward to Christ. It was finished as far as being useful. Let me think, how do I say that? I want to be careful how I say that. It's still useful, but not in the same way. It's useful in that we can look back at the events that have taken place that they pointed forward to, but it's from a different perspective than what it was for them back then. It was added because of sin. It points out sin and helps us understand sin and what it does. It was a burdensome and it was imperfect because, in fact, the perfect one was Christ himself. So, as the early Advent believers are working their way through the sanctuary and studying it out and beginning to understand its significance, it is within that context that they begin to focus on which part of this sequence, or which part of these two laws. They begin to look at the Ten Commandments in a very different way, because they also found the following. Let's see here. Revelation 11, verse 19 says, "And there was opened the temple of God." Who's writing this now? John the Revelator. "There was opened the temple of God that is in heaven, and there was seen in his temple the ark of his covenant, and there followed lightning and voices and thunder and earthquake and great hail." So, What was the dot that they connected here? And this is something that you and I sort of take for granted. Okay. There's a sanctuary down on this earth. John the Revelator is in vision, and he sees what in heaven? He sees not only a temple, which they pattern that provided for this down here, but he sees in there also the ark. And he knows what's in the ark. And what's in the ark? 10 Commandments. And they begin to understand that the 10 Commandments are still important. Notice the word I said, still important, because what was the prevailing and what is the prevailing interpretation by many people today in relationship to the 10 Commandments? It was what? It was nailed to the cross. And there are many, many Christians today who that's their way of looking at the 10 Commandments today. Well, the early Advent believers began to say, wait a minute now. If in fact John the Revelator, after the cross, is being shown a sanctuary in heaven, and there's an ark in heaven, we assume that there's also, that the 10 Commandments are still in play. And so when they start looking at the 10 Commandments, what do they find? They find the fourth commandment. That's exactly right. And let's see if I can find that here. And what is the first word in Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11? Remember, which is an interesting word. Okay, remember. And what is it that we find in the fourth commandment? We find who the person is behind all this. Okay? He's identified as what? As the creator, as the one who actually put everything together. And this, of course, brings us, you might say, full circle to where one begins to understand that when somebody creates something, when somebody builds something, and in particular, something that has moving parts, it is always built within the context of what? Laws and plans, etc. Yes, exactly. This then brings us to this point, which I've made many, many times, and that is that the 10 Commandments are simply a statement of how God has created things to work perfect forever. And at least in my mind, that helps me understand and appreciate and value the 10 Commandments on a very, very different level than just simply a list of arbitraries. This is what you can or can't do. And if you don't, you're going to face the consequences. So, you're familiar with the fourth commandment. We don't need to go through all that, but let's see. What have I skipped here? I really skipped forward a lot of fast stuff here, didn't I? Oh, yes. Okay. The other thing that the early Advent believers, again, this is before there's any Seventh-day Adventists. Before this. It says, Revelation 12:17, then the dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring, on those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. So again, those early believers, they understood who the dragon was. They understood who the woman was. They understood who her offspring were. And they began to realize that there was going to be some very significant distinguishing marks that were going to be evident in those people. And so they looked at, and they began to study, and they looked at the Ten Commandments in a very, very different way than what they had before. Matthew 5:17 through 18, Jesus said, excuse me, "Think not that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I came not to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass away, one jot or one little tittle shall in no wise pass away from the law, till all things have been accomplished." Okay. They came to understand that the Sabbath is a symbol of rest, not of works. It's a symbol of grace, not of legalism. It's a symbol of assurance, not of condemnation. And it's a symbol of depending upon God for salvation and not on ourselves. All right, any thoughts up to this point? All right, then let's move on to Wednesday. What are we focusing on this quarter? The Great Controversy. What is the Great Controversy all about? It's Christ on one hand, Satan on the other hand. And what is Satan's charge against God? He's not fair. He's arbitrary. And in fact, his law is really, it's a way of controlling people. And people need to be given their freedom. Now, yes?
So I would just say that his law determines who he is, right? So
It defines who he is. Yes.
So Satan's saying that there might be another way.
Sure.
That it's not arbitrary and that you will do what I say, but it will be as I am. You will appreciate why I am want to be
Like he is.
and not. But Satan is saying, why do we have to do that?
Sure.
Can we be different?
Okay, very good. Yes, I think, again, the law is not arbitrary. It defines how God has created things, and it's a perfect whole all the way around. As a result of what God has done, what is our response to him? To worship him, to honor and worship him, okay? Who desires also to be worshiped? Satan does, all right? And again, I'm not sure who, God obviously set up the seventh-day Sabbath first. And why did what is the purpose of the Sabbath? Communion with God, to spend time with him, to appreciate him, to thank him for what he's done, and to protect us, to give us an opportunity to grow. All of these things are part of what is God's purpose for the Sabbath. But the focus of the Sabbath is who? God. That's exactly right.
And it's to remember him.
To acknowledge who he is and what he has done for us. Okay, so then Satan comes along and he's challenging God, and he's challenging Jesus, and he now has identified an alternative. He also wants to be what? Worshipped. Okay, evolution, right? Exactly. So the interesting thing, I'm just trying to see. Okay, if you look on page 76 of your lesson quarterly, right down in the very middle of that second paragraph at the bottom, it says, the only part of God's law, the Ten Commandments, dealing with time is in which commandment? The fourth commandment. And then linking up with Daniel 7, it says this church, the church identified in Daniel 7, which is the little horn, has attempted to change the day of worship from Saturday, the seventh day, to Sunday, the first day of the week. Now, let me ask you a question. What we're talking about here is the real deal versus what? Counterfeit. I like that. I'll give you a point for that. The real deal versus a counterfeit. In other words, Satan is coming along and he is saying, there's no difference between the time on Saturday versus the time on Sunday. You can be blessed either way. Activity-wise, you can do pretty much whatever you want either day. You'll still benefit. One is real, in other words, what God has created, versus a fake, which is something that Satan has created. Now, then, down at the bottom, it says this. The very last paragraph. It says, for this reason, Revelation identifies the people who are faithful to God as those who keep the commandments of God. This includes the seventh-day Sabbath, not Sunday. Those who refuse the final call of the three angels to worship God on his holy day, and who worship the beast on his counterfeit Sabbath Sunday, will receive the mark of the beast. Now, I actually rewrote that sentence. And I'm going to suggest that the receive the mark of the beast, I'm going to change that to a word, and I want you to think about this. Will claim the mark of the beast. Do you understand the difference of what I just said here? In other words, we tend to think that the mark is something that is placed on us. But in reality, the mark, or the act that links us with Satan, is something that we actually go forward, or these people who worship on that day are actually going forward and saying, I'm going to take that and make it mine. In other words, it's not passively being received. It's something they're actively engaged in. Now, it's unfortunately fake. It's not real. There is no blessing there. And it will, in fact, be empty. Yes, George?
But that's also the reason for the three angels' messages.
Yes.
To warn them.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, let me If you haven't read this, I encourage you, I'm not going to read it here, but if you look on Friday, there's a whole section here under further thought, and I'm going to summarize this thought here for you, and that is this. There have been many people who have worshiped on Sunday, who have been very sincere in that worship, and who will be in heaven. Yes or no? Yes. Yes, indeed. But events are going to move, and events are going to take place in which the real versus the fake are going to become increasingly clear. And people will begin to understand things that they don't understand now. And at that point in time, you and I are going to have opportunity, I hope, to help people to understand the difference between the real and the fake. And at that point in time, people will have an opportunity to make a choice as to the real versus the fake. I think it's important that we understand, like I said earlier at the beginning, the times we're living in. And I believe that we are seeing the first, well, this has been going on for a while, but anyway, it's going to become clearer and clearer that the principles that we have gotten used to are being washed away, and in its place, more and more fake is going to be moved in. And our job is going to be to understand the real and be able to share it in a constructive and a proactive way and in a winsome way to help people come to the truth and understand really what God is all about and what Satan is up to.
I was a Sunday for most of my life.
Sunday keeper most of your life, yes.
It was 1970, 92. And then when I started studying and saw, it's like, and I had been teaching the commandments to Sunday school class, and I did not
Yeah.
see that my eyes were blind.
Yeah.
But the church that was giving me the Bible says she prayed, and my eyes were, when it was open, there was no other choice.
Yeah. Is that
I had to
amazing?
follow the Lord.
Well, wonderful. Okay, well, I encourage you to read these lessons. Like I said, I think the last three have been important, and we've kind of reviewed a few things a number of times. I hope you understand how we got here, because we got here because people like a Baptist farmer studied his Bible and was true to that Bible. And you and I are blessed as a result of those people. It is our heritage, and it is a heritage that we should not ignore, and we should not be shy about in terms of helping other people to experience the same things that you and I have experienced. So, have a good Sabbath, and may God bless you as you continue to study and learn and share in your interaction with people.